Autopsy doctors of Reddit. What was the biggest revelation you had to a person's death after you carried out the procedure? Worked at an animal hospital. They did necropsies for zoos all the time. An alligator died. And they shipped it to the hospital. Refrigerated etc. to stop the decay. They took it out and put it up on the table. After doing all the paperwork, they started opening up the alligator. After the first cut, the alligator opened its eyes. Turns out it wasn't dead. The zoo vet mistook an illness for death and the low temperature put it basically into a coma. Edit. Unfortunately, this is all the information I know on this story. It's been 7 years since I worked at that place. I worked at a coroner's office for a while, and once we had a guy who we thought had died from an OD on meth. Well, we started the autopsy and I went to cut his lungs out and blueberry muffin mix started coming out of them. I stuck my finger in his mouth and it was full of blueberry muffin mix. And it was in throat. Turns out he got just high enough to pass out while eating the muffin mix and he ended up choking to death. 6 months after my aunt's passing in a drunk driving incident, the coroner decided to ring up my mum and inform her that they completed their report on her passing, and deemed the likelihood of suicidal intentions which may have factored into said incident. I initially didn't understand how coroners could deduce such a thing. Until I remembered. Self-harm scars are a thing. My mum had only just gotten to the acceptance stage of grief. And it put her firmly back to square one. She's fine now. So I'm not an autopsy doctor or anything of the sort. I did sit in on a murder trial. The mom drowned her infant in hot water. She claimed she was giving her newborn a bath in the sink with one of those sling-type inserts so babies can't go under. The doorbell rang. She answered and came back to her kid in scalding hot water. She claimed the kid had somehow turned on the hot water and burned himself while she was answering the door. But drowning was the ultimate rule of death. In the autopsy photos, the most disturbing thing I've ever seen in real life is you could clearly make out hand marks on that poor child's skin. On his biceps. You could see the finger outlines like you do if someone slaps you. I was 18 years old taking a criminal justice class. Just the ease of watching the trail and her nonchalance killed most faith I had in humanity at the time. I know this doesn't quite fit the question, but for years I saw that boy's face in my sleep. What really kills me is despite the evidence she got off. I did the autopsy of both the robber and his victim. The robber shot the victim in the back when he tried to escape in a motorcycle. And the robber was shot by the police in the exact same situation. What's interesting is that they both died by exactly the same lesion. Both of them had their fourth lumbar vertebra shattered and their aorta, main artery of the body, sectioned at the same level. I thought of it like an extreme example of instant karma. During my internship rotation a couple of years back, a 40-year-old guy came in because he suddenly collapsed while drinking with friends. He came in unresponsive, mouth bleeding, and not breathing. So we had to intubate him. For some reason, the endotracheal tube, the stiff tube placed inside the trachea to help the patient breathe, won't go in. But we managed to suction copious amounts of blood clots. After CPR still with unsuccessful intubation, so we had to bag him with a face mask. The patient was declared dead and diagnosed with a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. During the autopsy, they found out that the guy was apparently shot by a gun from the top of the head. The entry wound was obscured by his hair and was barely bleeding at all. And the bullet somehow went through the back of the guy's throat and made a hole behind the base of the tongue, which the endotracheal tube kept slipping into. During medical school I did a forensic pathology rotation during 4th year. Had an autopsy on a woman found in her burned out home. She was on home oxygen and the fire started in her bedroom. There were also liquor bottles around the home. So the thought was maybe she was drunk, smoking in bed, and caught herself on fire? She was badly charred up on the outside with no real distinguishing characteristics I could see. We opened her up, and when we got to her lungs, they were just the prettiest pink you could imagine. Just like in the textbooks. This means she wasn't alive to breathe in the smoke and soot from the fire, so she had died. Spoiler. Was murdered before it was said. Ultimately, I read in the paper some weeks later it was the boyfriend trying to get insurance money. Training in the medical examiner's office. Elderly woman found dead by herself in her home. There was nothing suspicious, so I was given the case. Took out all the organs. Dissected everything. Completely unremarkable. I cut through the larynx as the last step before I could clean up and finish the case, and boom. Giant piece of chicken lodged in her windpipe. Died choking on dinner. I was an investigator for a state medical examiner for just over 2 years. Had a mom that had drank herself to death, according to the husband, after relapsing on Mother's Day weekend. I just felt like something was off. Sent her for an autopsy. Had a ruptured liver where dude had essentially beat her till she internally bled to death. Later, while out on bail, he stole a semi-truck. Crashed it in a pond. Got out shooting at a deputy. And they killed him. Saved the taxpayers a good chunk of money. Not a doctor, but a whole-body scientific donation technician. I'm the person who dissects cadavers after they were donated. We very commonly would get young cases. Normally overdoses. Had a mid-30s female. Went to medical examiner prior to donation. But they only did an external evaluation. I went to check her genitals to see if I could palpate a uterus. Found a condom full of pills. Similar to most. The body became a crime scene and we couldn't touch her. When we finally were able to continue, they asked us to photograph the pills to send to the examiner's office. They were mostly Advil and Zyrtec. Easily one of the weirdest things I've ever found. Working in the ER. Young man comes in. 1 of 4 in a nasty auto accident. Speed inexperience, car flipped. Passengers ejected. 1 expired shortly after coming into the ER. I transported the body down to the morgue. First time I had felt a human being with all their bones broken. Felt like trying to lift sheets full of rolling bowling balls. Once in the morgue I commented how unscathed he looked. He really did. Some dirt. The ET tube. Not much else. Me offered I could view the autopsy if interested. I was interested. The first thing they noted were the X-rays of the fractures. Basically all the major bones, including multiple rib fractures. When they opened the body, the organs were described as near liquefied. It wasn't until weeks later I got the whole story from the EMT who had been on scene. Seems the passenger had been 1/2 in 1/2 out the window while the car had been flipping. He was just days shy of 17. The driver was just days past 16. His parents had bought him a brand new car. He'd had it less than 72 HRS. Driver lived, though with severe brain damage. Front and rear passengers died. Rear driver's side passenger survived with not too much permanent physical damage. I have friends whose kids are getting their driver's license. I never pass up a chance to drop that story on them. I've seen a lot of FD up things in my healthcare career. That is one of the grand total of 3 that make me tear up. And it's one from early on. I was in charge of making copies of all evidence to be used in the trial of Donald Harvey in 1989. He was known as the Angel of Death. One bit of evidence was an autopsy photo of an exhumed elderly woman. The examiner was holding with tweezers an 18-piece of cotton being pulled from her throat. Harvey liked to stuff cotton so far down into the victims' throats that it could not be seen. I still can't shake the image from my brain. Not mine, but a doctor I used to work with. Back when he was in school. He would do his cadaver labs really late at night. To many people during the day. One time it was really late. Around 2 a.m. He was listening to his lecture on his headphones and he saw the cadaver's arm move/twitch. He thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him. Then he saw it again. Proceeded to run away in a panic. He told a few of his classmates what happened, but nobody believed him. Next day they had a group cadaver lab with the same cadaver. The arm twitched yet again. The professor did some digging and it turns out the patient's pacemaker was still fully functional and occasionally fired, causing the arm twitch. He was so relieved. He thought there was a zombie in there.